Planeswalkers are an oddity in the multiverse of Magic the Gathering. We often lose sight of how rare, statistically, a Planeswalker Spark is, as we experience several in a given set. Not to mention the story follows an entire cast of Planeswalking main characters. Still, a Planeswalker Spark is a phenomenon only few ever experience, and only under very specific conditions. For example, traditionally, you would have to be a sentient mortal being with a mortal soul to be born with a latent spark. Only once was this golden rule ever ignored, and that was in the extreme case of the only artificial planeswalker, Karn, who obtained and secured his spark through the transfer of 2 different human souls. So despite being a golem, an artificial life, Karn still required a human soul to become a planeswalker. But now, a new planeswalker to the roster of Magic the Gathering seems to turn everything we know about Sparks upside down. Where once Karn stood alone as an exception to the planeswalker rule, he's now joined by another, the second artificial planeswalker, Calix, Destiny's Hand. Let's explore what the cards don't tell us about Planeswalker Sparks and how unique of a case Calix is. How does one actually become a planeswalker? Hello everyone and welcome back to the Ether Hub. I'm Simon, bringing you more Magic the Gathering lore. Today we dive into a really interesting question. What makes a planeswalker? What is the nature of the spark itself? All of this was thrown into question with the creation of Calix, the new planeswalker in Theros Beyond Death, whose origin shines a new light and opens new possibilities to the mystery of the Planeswalker Spark. As we discussed at the very start of the video, Karn was the only previously known case of an artificial planeswalker. Before his creation, it was understood that only sentient life could harness a spark, yet even more restricting, that life had to possess a mortal soul. This is where Karn is sort of an exception to that rule, but in reality he kinda just hugs the very edge of that exception. It's true that his physical body is a machine. He's a golem created by the artificer Urza, so he isn't a natural sentient life form, and certainly he's devoid of a mortal soul. Yet, through a cataclysmic event involving the Weatherlight crew and the total collection of the legacy artifacts, Karn found himself infused with life, a soul, and that soul, the soul of Urza himself, came with it a pre-existing planeswalker spark. And boom, you got yourself a quote-unquote artificial planeswalker. But still, even in this insane scenario, it required a mortal soul to house that planeswalker spark. And while Karn is viewed as an artificial planeswalker, he still very much covered that component needed to become one. We can compare this to creatures who, for all intents and purposes, appear to meet the benchmark for sentient beings with mortal bodies, but who themselves cannot become planeswalkers. These would be beings like demons and angels. These life forms do in fact have physical forms and are sentient, but it's specifically written that they cannot become planeswalkers because they don't possess a mortal soul, which is the vessel for the spark. Angels don't have this soul as they're essentially tightly packed concentrations of mana, typically white, given an angelic form and a purpose. As mana makes up their soul, a spark can't be inherently ignited. Same deal for the demons. They do not possess a mortal soul as, when they're killed, at least through traditional mortal means, they don't really die. They essentially follow D&D rules and go back to where they spawn, the blind eternity, or the space between space, all that which exists between the planes we visit. In a sense, demons are in fact planeswalkers already, as they can traverse the blind eternity like planeswalkers and visit multiple different planes. Still, they aren't classified as such because they do this without that all-important planeswalker spark. Still a cool trick though. Now, some people may cite 2 characters closely tied to angels and demons who are in fact planeswalkers, but they're special cases. Serra was a planeswalker and is often credited for the creation of the iconic Serra Angels, yet Serra herself wasn't an angel. She was just a normal human planeswalker who created them. And on the darker side, we have Ob Nixilis, who actually is a demon and a planeswalker, but they're not mutually exclusive. This is a little misleading, as Ob Nixilis is actually one of the last old school planeswalkers like Teferi, i.e. planeswalkers that were around before the Mending. And he's been a planeswalker long before becoming a demon. Obnixilis, the mortal man, was cursed and became a demon much later in his planeswalking life, and the effect actually initially caused his spark to be suppressed. Now he's finally gotten that spark back, but the curse still lingers, giving us a planeswalking demon who really isn't. So with these cases, you can see how the golden rule of Planeswalker Sparks has stayed pretty reliable over the years despite a few questionable cases who just skirt the edges. But in Theros Beyond Death, everything we thought we knew about these sparks was thrown out the window. Enter Calix. Like Karn, Calix, introduced in Theros Beyond Death, is an artificial planeswalker. He was created and is not a traditional life form we would recognize as being compatible with a Planeswalker Spark. Yet, unlike Karn, there's no reasonable explanation for why Calix has a soul capable to ignite a spark. Karn, we know, was basically given that soul. Calix has no such background. So how does Calix become a planeswalker? Well, first, we have to learn about the origins of this character. In the Theros Beyond Death storyline, we follow the reemergence of a lost god, Klothys, god of fate and destiny, one of the oldest gods in the pantheon who wields incredible powers over people's futures, and who is furiously loyal to ensuring that fate is never subverted. We get a sense of her personality on Furious Rage. She's the final say on these matters, and to Klothys, destiny and fate are undeniable and unpreventable. Yet, in Beyond Death, it seems the laws of destiny have simply failed. Klothys was in self-exile from Nyx, locked in the Underworld as a self-imposed jailer of the Titans who once terrorized Theros before the Age of Gods. But back in Nyx, the gods are at war with one another, with Heliod being the main driver of this madness. That godly conflict is causing trouble all over Theros, even in the Underworld. The Titans have broken loose, along with countless souls who have used the conflict to escape their fates in the Underworld and are spilling back into the realm of the living, including our hero in the story, Elspeth Tirel. This is an affront Klothys just can't stand for. Like we see on the card, Fateful End, Klothys sets off to put everyone on Theros back in their place. In this effort, Klothys crafted countless Nyx-born constructs to serve as her arbiters on Theros. These are enchantment creatures woven from Nyx itself, a force most of the gods have and are using in their own war efforts. We can see those tied to Klothys' mission to grab fate-denying souls and rounding them back to the Underworld on cards like Destiny Spinner and Warden of the Chained. These are her troops, her front line in the defense of fate and destiny. And the greatest of her creations would be that of Calix, Hand of Destiny, who this god crafted for a specific and very defined purpose, to track and capture the soul of Elspeth Tirel. While most of the gods in the Theros pantheon don't understand what planeswalkers are, maybe not even knowing such beings exist, some are very much aware. Gods like Krufix, god of the unknown and horizons, learned about planeswalkers by reading their minds and learning their history and knowledge of other worlds as they entered Theros. Heliod was once unaware of planeswalkers, but learned of them when Xenagos, a satyr planeswalker, ascended to godhood as the god of revels, and coincidentally, when his champion, Elspeth, revealed that she too was a planeswalker. Other gods like Thassa had experiences with planeswalkers, like when Kiora stole her godly bident and just vanished, but it's unknown if the god of the sea comprehends what Kiora actually is. The last god who for sure knows of the existence of planeswalkers is Klothys. As god of destiny, she can see into someone's true past and weave to determine their futures. Seeing Elspeth for who she was, Klothys crafted a warrior of fate to fit the particular abilities of this new target. Thus, Calix was born. Calix was not born with a Planeswalker Spark, but he was created using an untold amount of Klothys' power and essence, enough so that the effort was quite taxing on the god. What Calix was initially given in terms of abilities were those useful in tracking very difficult and elusive targets, perfect for one like Elspeth. As seen in Relentless Pursuit, Calix was given the tools and skills needed to track Elspeth down. Calix would in fact find and fight Elspeth a number of times, but in each encounter, he was defeated. Elspeth was a seasoned warrior, tried and tested in tactical combat, and she had a massive chip on her shoulder, along with the convictions of a worthy cause, justice. Calix was essentially a newborn pup, untested, unpracticed, but as a Nyxborn, he learned from each defeat and grew shockingly proficient with each new encounter. Still, this wasn't enough to take down Elspeth, and while each fight became harder, Elspeth ultimately prevailed. Succeeding in her own personal mission, Elspeth, fearing the constant pursuit of Calix and the other agents of Klothys, planeswalked away from Theros. This was a massive moment in the development of Calix. He was a being crafted for a singular purpose. His destiny is to deliver Elspeth to her fate in the Underworld. With that no longer possible, Calix fell into despair and suffered an existential crisis. In this moment is when we see Calix's spark ignite. If his destiny is to defeat Elspeth, then fate would be weaved to ensure that that can come to pass, making Calix the first true artificial planeswalker we've ever seen in the Magic the Gathering multiverse. A construct of a god without a mortal body, completely lacking a mortal soul, now has a planeswalker spark. The debate now turns to, how is this possible? Given all the evidence we've seen in the past, countless examples of those who go close to crossing the golden rule but still obey them, it seems Calix shatters that perception. So what does that mean for the nature of the Planeswalker Spark? While we're not given much insight into how Calix gains his spark, there are some arguments cycling through the Vorthos community. One is that since Klothys crafted Calix as the perfect tool to pursue Elspeth, a mortal soul was used in his creation, and fate was twisted to ensure that that soul had a latent spark. This could make sense, but from what we know about the Nyxborn, it's that they may look like mortal beings, but are constructed in a similar way to angels on other planes are, in that they're just really strong pools of mana and the fabric of Nyx, which give the gods form, and which give the Nyxborn their form. So much like angels, their essence or soul shouldn't be compatible with a spark. Luckily, we don't have to lament on this puzzler for very long, as Mark Rosewater and other story developers on Twitter and blogs announced the true origins of Calix and all the sparks in the multiverse. It's whatever they damn well please. Yep, the case of Calix is a simple case of retconning lore. That's the practice of taking established lore and changing it to fit the new narrative direction, and chewing in some catch-all excuse for why this is the new lore standard. We still don't have that much of a reasoning behind this change yet, at least from a lore perspective, but we do know that easing on this limitation allows the creative team to be, well, more creative when designing planeswalkers. This opens the door for angels, demons, artifacts, enchantments like Calix technically is, zombies or undead to all become potential planeswalkers. I'm not a huge fan of retcons personally, especially if they aren't tied to some believable story development. They can cause continuity issues for past stories, and by their very nature, they can undermine anything at any time, meaning a story or a universe's lore can't be trusted once it's used. The change to Planeswalker Sparks is problematic, but to me, I see it as more of an evolution. Don't get me wrong, this is a complete retcon, and we're probably never going to see an in-game lore reasoning behind this change. But as it opens the door for angels to become planeswalkers, I'm all in. Calix is just one of a rare set of conditions found in a story that not only questions what we knew about established lore, but also gets us excited to see what the future could hold. And all of this came about because a god crafted this seemingly underrated planeswalker, meaning Calix has already had a much bigger impact on the game and our community than anyone could ever anticipate. I want to thank you all so much for joining me today on this adventure, and if you enjoyed the content, consider helping us grow by throwing the video a like, subscribing to the channel, and taking the notification bell so you never miss out on a new release. As always guys, thank you all so much for watching the Ether Hub, and until next time, see ya!